My son said I was too old to live alone and tried to move me into a tiny room in his basement. I signed the house over to him. The next morning, he found a for sale sign. I had sold his new house and kept the money. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd shock my own family, but life has a funny way of handing you moments that test your patience and your sense of self-respect. My son, Mark, has always had strong opinions, which I used to find charming when he was younger. But somewhere along the way, those opinions turned into orders, and I started realizing that the sweet little boy I once knew had grown into a man who assumed he knew what was best for me. And believe me, there's nothing quite like being told at 62 that you're too old to live alone. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just come back from my weekly bridge game at the community centre. I love those afternoons. The laughter, the little competitive streaks, and yes, the occasional gossip about our neighbours. That day, I was still buzzing with a victory. I'd finally beaten Mrs. Pennington at hearts, and I felt pretty proud of myself. But my mood didn't last long. When I walked in the door, there he was, leaning against the wall like he owned the place, arms crossed and eyebrows raised. "Mom," Mark said, without even bothering with a greeting. "We need to talk." I immediately knew this wasn't going to be casual. I dropped my purse onto the counter and sat down. "Okay, honey, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're living alone," he said, straight to the point. "And it's not safe. You're too old for this. You need to move somewhere safer." I stared at him, trying to hide my disbelief. I've been living on my own for over 20 years, and never once have I felt incapable of taking care of myself. I can cook, clean, pay my bills, and drive, things that, apparently, some people think disqualify me from independent living as soon as I hit 60. "Too old?" I repeated, my voice sharper now. "Mark, I'm fine. I go to the doctor regularly. I walk 3 miles every day, and I just won at bridge today. I'm not fragile." He sighed and gave me that exasperated look I've seen since he was 12. "I know you think you're fine, Mom, but accidents happen. What if you fall? What if you have a heart attack? You can't just stay here alone." I leaned back in my chair, trying to keep my temper in check. "So what? You want me to move in with you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes," he said. "Well, not exactly with me. There's a room in the basement. It's small, but it'll be safe. You'll be right there, and I'll check on you every day." I could feel my jaw tighten. The idea of living in a basement, in a room so small I'd be bumping into walls, with no real kitchen or decent sunlight, was absurd. But Mark didn't see it that way. To him, it was practical, responsible, loving even. To me, it was infantilizing, insulting, and downright rude. "I'm not moving into your basement, Mark," I said firmly. "I am not a teenager, and this is my house. I bought it with my own money, and I am capable of living here for as long as I want." He frowned. "Mum, I'm just trying to help." "And I appreciate that. Really," I said, trying to soften the blow. "But help doesn't mean taking over my life or making me feel like I'm a burden." Mark looked like he was about to argue further, but then he got this glint in his eye, the one that always makes me suspicious. He's always had that "I'm right and you're wrong" look, and it never bodes well. "Okay, if that's how you feel," he said slowly. "Then, well, I guess I'll have to take stronger measures." I frowned. "Stronger measures?" I asked. "You'll see," he said, leaving the room like he was some sort of general executing a well-thought-out plan. I should have known then that he wasn't going to back down. Over the next few days, Mark ramped up his efforts. He came over every other day, helping me reorganize the kitchen, suggesting I get rid of furniture, and of course, talking endlessly about the basement. He even tried to measure the space to convince me that I could fit all my things in there. I stood my ground every single time, telling him politely, but firmly, that I wasn't moving. But then he tried a different tactic. One morning, I found a stack of brochures on my counter for assisted living communities. Places with shared meals, nurses on call, and strict schedules. I picked one up and felt a flare of anger. "Do you think I want to live in one of these?" I asked him when he came over later. "I'm just thinking of your safety," he said, like I was too stubborn to see reason. "I can handle my safety, Mark," I replied. "And besides, I've lived in this house longer than you've been alive. This is my home, not a project." He didn't respond. He just shook his head, muttering something about being stubborn like your mother. Which, by the way, is true. But stubborn has kept me independent for decades, not trapped in a basement. I spent that evening pacing my kitchen, thinking about how I could make him understand. And then, a wild idea hit me. What if I didn't just tell him no? What if I showed him I could make my own choices in a way that he couldn't control? I didn't want to be cruel. I just wanted him to see that I am, indeed, capable of living my life on my own terms. The next day, I invited him over for coffee. I could see the excitement in his eyes, like he was ready to launch into another lecture about my safety. But I had a surprise for him. "Mark, I've been thinking," I said as I poured him a cup. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need to make some changes for my future. And I think, well, I think I'm ready to make you part of that plan." He leaned forward, eager. "See? I knew you'd come around." "So, the basement?" I smiled. "No, not the basement. I mean, your house." He blinked. "My house?" "Yes," I said, letting the words sink in. "I want you to have my house." Mark's eyes lit up. You want to give me the house?" I nodded. "Absolutely. I've been thinking a lot about the future, and I want you to handle things. It's all yours, starting today." He was thrilled, overwhelmed even. He practically bounced around the room, thanking me, hugging me, and talking about all the renovations he would do. I just smiled, keeping my own little secret tucked away inside my head. You see, while he thought he was getting the ultimate victory, I was about to play a card he never saw coming. The next morning, while Mark was still asleep in his new enthusiasm, I made a few calls. Within a couple of hours, I had arranged for a "for sale" sign to go up in the front yard. The paperwork was all handled discreetly, and by mid-morning, the house was officially on the market. I could hear the sound of his voice in my head, his disbelief, his anger, his confusion. And honestly, I didn't feel guilty. I felt liberated. All those years of him trying to control my life, all the subtle and not so subtle attempts to infantilize me, evaporated in that one moment. I had turned the tables without hurting anyone directly, and I had done it in a way that preserved my independence. By the time Mark came downstairs, coffee in hand, he froze. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again, like a fish out of water. "What? What is this?" he finally managed to say. I took a sip of my own coffee and smiled sweetly. "It's your new house, Mark, but it's also for sale." He looked at me like I had sprouted wings and started flying around the room. You can't do that. I thought, we agreed." We agreed that you could take over my life, Mark, I said gently, but I decided I'd rather keep living mine. And well, this way, you get a choice too. His face turned red, and for a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. But only a moment. Because the truth is, nothing feels better than finally standing up for yourself, even when it means shocking someone you love. And just like that, I realized something important. Age isn't a liability, it's experience. And experience has a way of giving you the tools to outsmart even your cleverest opponents, especially when those opponents are your own grown-up children. If you like this story, tell me in the comments where you are watching it from and what time it is. The look on Mark's face that morning was something I'll never forget. It was a mix of confusion, anger, and pure disbelief. He stood frozen in the kitchen, like he was waiting for someone to tell him it was all a joke. I couldn't help but sip my coffee slowly, savoring the moment, because let's be honest, he had spent weeks trying to tell me what I could and couldn't do with my own life, and now he was witnessing the consequences. You actually did it, he finally stammered. You put the house up for sale. But why? I smiled, leaning back in my chair like this was the most casual thing in the world. Because, Mark, I want to live my life on my own terms. You wanted me to move into your basement, and I didn't want to. So I decided to make a choice that works for me. But that's my house now. Legally, you signed it over to me yesterday. His voice cracked slightly, like his excitement from the previous day had been violently yanked away. Yes, I said, nodding, and I appreciate that. But just because the house is in your name doesn't mean I have to live the way you want me to. Ownership isn't control, Mark. I think you're forgetting that. He paced around the kitchen, muttering under his breath. This is insane. You can't do this. Mum, I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I laughed softly. Doing it to you? Mark, I'm not doing anything to you. I'm doing it for me. I get to choose how I live. And if part of that means putting the house up for sale while keeping the money, well, that's just me being clever. He threw his hands up. Clever? Mum, this isn't clever. This is cruel. I shook my head, trying to keep my tone gentle. Not cruel, strategic. Life has a way of teaching lessons sometimes. And you, my dear, needed a lesson in respecting other people's independence. Mark sank into a chair, defeated, or maybe stunned into silence. I could see the gears turning in his head, the realization that he wasn't in control anymore. That was when I decided to sit down and explain myself fully, because I didn't want him to just be angry. I wanted him to understand. Look, Mark, I started. I know you were trying to protect me. I know your intentions were good, even if the execution was questionable. But I am not incapable. I don't need someone to monitor every step I take or measure every square inch of my living space. I am my own person, and I've earned the right to make my own decisions, even if they surprise you. He looked at me like I had just grown another head. But you signed over the house. That's serious. People don't just... You can't... Oh, I can, I said, smiling slyly. I can. And I did. And here's the thing. Signing the house over doesn't automatically mean I have to live under your rules. You thought you were being the hero, but in reality, you were trying to cage me. He slumped back in his chair, silent now, like he was trying to process a storm. I felt a strange mixture of triumph and guilt, but mostly triumph. I had been pushed, and I had pushed back in a way that left no room for argument. After a long pause, he finally muttered, "So, what happens now?" "Well," I said, keeping my tone breezy, "the house is for sale. I have an agent coming by tomorrow to start showing it, and I'm going to keep the money. You get to decide if you want to buy it back. But honestly, I think it's best if we both just move forward." Mark's eyes widened. "Keep the money? You're serious?" I nodded. "Absolutely. I earned that money over decades. It's mine to keep, and I think it's the perfect way to remind you that independence isn't something you can just take away from someone, no matter how much you love them." He looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. I could tell he was realizing something important. I wasn't going to be his project, and there was no negotiation that could change that. Over the next few hours, the tension hung in the air. Mark alternated between pacing, sitting, and muttering to himself. Every time he tried to argue, I simply smiled and reminded him gently that this was my choice. He finally left late that afternoon, still grumbling but quiet. I stayed behind, taking in the silence of my home, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: complete control over my own life. The following day, my real work began. I called my real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Diane, who I had worked with before when I sold a small cabin upstate. I explained the situation as neutrally as possible, omitting the fact that my son had basically forced my hand. Diane didn't bat an eye. "Well, sounds like you're ready for a fresh start. Let's get it listed and see what offers we get. People love homes like yours, charming, full of character, with a great yard." I smiled at Diane's enthusiasm. "Exactly. It's time for someone else to enjoy this place. And for me, well, time for freedom." Within a couple of hours, the "for sale" sign was up, and I felt a thrill of satisfaction every time I looked at it. Mark called mid-morning, probably to check in or try to guilt me into taking it down, but I kept it simple. "Hi, Mum," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "So, about the house." "Mark," I said lightly, "the house is for sale. The sign is up. Everything is moving forward. I suggest you focus on your own plans and let me handle mine." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, he muttered, "I can't believe you're doing this." "I know," I said with a chuckle. "It's shocking, but trust me, it's exactly what needed to happen." After that call, I spent the afternoon packing up a few personal items and organizing the house for showings. I didn't feel rushed or panicked. Instead, I felt energized. There's a certain thrill in reclaiming your life, in taking actions that affirm your independence and make it clear that no one, not even your own child, can dictate your choices. Later that evening, Mark showed up again, this time carrying a casserole, which I appreciated despite everything. He placed it on the counter and looked at me with a combination of apology and frustration. "Mom," he started, Look, I'm trying to understand. I really am. But this whole thing, it's hard for me to accept." I nodded, feeling a flicker of sympathy. "I know, honey. Change is hard. And seeing someone you love make decisions you don't agree with can be unsettling. But it's not about you. It's about me. And I need to live my life my way." He sighed, finally, and sat down. "I guess you really mean it. You're serious about selling." "I am," I said. "But don't worry. I'm not going anywhere else drastic. I just want a life where I make my own rules. And I think, deep down, You'll respect that, even if you don't like it." He looked at me, long and hard, then finally nodded. "Yeah, I guess I can respect that, but it's going to take some getting used to." "I understand," I said, patting his hand gently. "Just remember, Mark, loving someone doesn't mean controlling them. You've got to let them make their own choices, even when it scares you." That night, after he left, I walked through my home, looking at all the little things that made it mine. The old armchair in the living room, the kitchen that smelled like fresh bread, the garden I'd tended for years. I realized with a sudden rush of clarity that independence isn't just about living alone. It's about making choices, taking risks, and standing firm when the world, or even your own family, tries to dictate your life. And as I sipped my evening tea, watching the sunset through the living room window, I knew one thing for certain. Mark had learned a lesson, yes. But more importantly, I had reminded myself, and maybe even proved to the world, that growing older doesn't mean losing your voice. It means learning how to wield it. The next few days were a whirlwind, but in a surprisingly good way. Diane, my real estate agent, was relentless in the best possible sense, full of energy, ideas, and just the right touch of optimism that made me feel like this house was about to have a whole new chapter. She came over first thing Monday morning, clipboard in hand, and started pacing through every room, pointing out little fixes that would make the house irresistible to buyers. "I know it's lived in," she said, patting the sofa affectionately. "But buyers love that. They love character. It makes a house feel like home before they even move in. You're going to get multiple offers, I promise." I smiled, feeling a spark of pride. It was funny. This house had been mine for decades, full of memories, laughter, and even a few tears. And now I was about to let someone else make their own memories here. It wasn't easy to think about, but I reminded myself, this wasn't about nostalgia. This was about freedom. As Diane snapped photos of every corner, Mark called. Of course he did. I could already hear the slight tremor in his voice. "Mom," he said, "I saw the sign. Really, you're going through with it." "Yes, Mark," I said, setting the phone down and leaning against the counter. "We've talked about this. The house is listed, and I'm moving forward." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "I just don't know why you're doing this to me." "Mark," I said softly, "I'm not doing this to you. I'm doing it for me. And if you really love me, you'll understand that independence isn't a punishment. It's a right." He was quiet after that. I knew he was thinking it over, probably weighing his outrage against the realization that I wasn't going to back down. And that, my friends, was exactly the point. By the next morning, Diane had scheduled the first showing. I decided to stay out of the way, letting potential buyers explore the house without me hovering like some worried parent. I went for a long walk in the neighborhood instead, letting the crisp air clear my head. There's something about walking through familiar streets, past houses with families bustling in and out, that reminds you of your own strength. I'd spent years making choices, building a life, and even though my son thought he could dictate my future, I knew the truth. This was my life, and I wasn't giving it up. When I returned, Diane was buzzing. "Oh, they loved it, Mum. The couple really fell in love with the garden. They kept saying how cozy the living room felt. And your kitchen? Well, they couldn't stop talking about it. They're going to put in an offer." I grinned. "See? Told you. People appreciate what's lived in. They appreciate character. Not everyone needs a brand new, shiny house to feel at home." That evening, Mark stopped by again. This time he was calmer, but visibly tense. He walked through the house slowly, touching the counters, peeking out the windows, and muttering under his breath. I watched him from the sofa, feeling a strange mixture of amusement and satisfaction. "Mom," he said finally, "I just don't get it. Why sell? Why not just keep it and, you know, let me handle the basement thing?" I shook my head. "Mark, we've been over this. The basement thing isn't happening, and I've realized something important. I don't need anyone to handle me. I can handle myself." He let out a long breath and leaned against the doorway. "It's just hard. I thought I was helping. I thought I was being responsible." "You were," I said, softening my tone. "But sometimes helping means letting someone make their own decisions, even when you think they're risky, even when it scares you." He looked at me, eyes wide, like he was slowly beginning to understand. "I guess, yeah, I just want you to be safe." "And I appreciate that, Mark. Really, I do. But there's a difference between safety and control, and I've earned the right to choose how I live, even if it surprises you." Over the next few days, the offers started rolling in. Diane kept me updated with a cheerful buzz that was impossible not to catch. "Mom, you're going to be blown away. 3 offers already, and one of them is even above asking. People love this house." I laughed, shaking my head. "Well, that's a nice surprise. I guess all these years of caring for this place paid off." Mark, of course, wasn't thrilled. He called almost every day, trying to talk me out of it, to convince me that I was making a mistake, or that I should at least let him buy it back. I listened patiently, letting him vent, but I didn't budge. He was beginning to realize that he couldn't manipulate me anymore, and that realization was not easy for him. One afternoon, I caught him pacing in the kitchen again. "Mom," he said, exasperated, "you really mean it. You're going to sell, and you're going to keep the money." "Yes, Mark," I said, stirring my tea calmly. "That's exactly what I mean. I worked hard for this house, and I'm allowed to make my own decisions about it, including selling it if I want." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I just don't understand how you can be so calculating." I raised an eyebrow. "Calculating? I think of it as strategic. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm just asserting my independence, which, by the way, is something everyone my age should do a little more of." He muttered something under his breath, and then sat down, head in his hands. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from him, keeping my tone calm. "Mark, it's okay to be upset. I get it. But this is my life, and it's about time I reminded everyone, including you, that I still have the right to make my own choices." Finally, he looked up at me. "I guess can respect that, but it's going to take some getting used to." "I knows," I said, smiling. "And that's fine. The important thing is, you're learning something about independence and about your mother." As the days went on, Diane arranged for more showings, and I found myself oddly energized. I wasn't just selling a house, I was reclaiming my life. Each visitor brought a fresh perspective, and I even started imagining who might live here next. A young couple starting their family, a retiree like me, ready to enjoy a quieter life. The possibilities felt endless. Meanwhile, Mark's behavior shifted. He stopped trying to argue and started asking questions, not to manipulate me, but out of curiosity. "Mum, if someone buys it, what are you going to do?" "I'll keep living my life, Mark," I said. I'll stay in my apartment, travel a bit, maybe spend more time with friends. The house doesn't define me. I define me." He nodded slowly, as if trying to absorb that concept. And for the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. A week later, Diane called me with exciting news. An offer had come in, and it was higher than I expected. I sat down, my heart pounding with excitement and a little disbelief. The reality of the situation finally hit me. I had done it. I had taken control of my life in a way that Mark never anticipated, and I was about to walk away with the freedom and the money to prove it. When I hung up, I felt a sense of triumph that was hard to describe. It wasn't about getting back at Mark. It wasn't about spite or revenge. It was about reclaiming a sense of agency, a reminder that age doesn't make you powerless. It just gives you the experience to be smart about it. That evening, Mark stopped by one last time before the offer was finalized. He was quiet, subdued even. I could see him processing everything, and I felt a flicker of empathy. "Mum," he said, cautiously, "I know I overstepped. I just was trying to help. And I guess I didn't realize how much this house meant to you." I smiled and patted his hand. "I know, Mark, and I appreciate your concern, but this was never about the house. It was about independence, respect, and making choices that are right for me. I hope one day you'll understand that." He nodded slowly, and for the first time, I felt like maybe he did. It was a small step, but it meant everything. The day the offer was finalized was one of those rare mornings where everything felt surreal, but perfect at the same time. I woke up to the sunlight streaming through my living room windows, the scent of coffee filling the kitchen, and a sense of calm determination that only comes when you know you've made the right choice. Diane called me early, practically buzzing with excitement. "Mom," she said, her voice like a kid on Christmas morning. "The buyers signed the papers. The house is officially sold." I set my coffee down and sank into the sofa, letting the words wash over me. It was done. The house that had been both my sanctuary and my battleground with Mark was officially no longer mine. The reality hit hard, but in the best way possible. This wasn't loss, it was liberation. Mark showed up mid-morning, carrying the faint aroma of takeout in his hands, like he thought food could somehow soften the blow. I could see the tension in his shoulders the moment he walked through the door. "Mum," he started, hesitating as if searching for the right words. Well, I got the notice. It's really happening. You sold it." "Yes, Mark," I said, pouring him a cup of coffee and handing it over. "It's happening, and it's okay to be upset. You're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling." He slumped into the chair, staring at the floor. "I just didn't think you'd actually go through with it. I thought maybe you'd change your mind at the last minute." "I didn't," I said, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "I've made my choice, and this is it. And I want you to understand something important. This isn't about punishing you. It's about showing you, and reminding myself, that I am capable of making my own decisions, regardless of age, opinion, or expectation." He let out a long, slow breath, finally looking at me. "I guess, yeah, I see that now. I just wasn't ready. I thought I was helping, but maybe I was overstepping." "You were," I admitted, smiling softly. "But that's part of life, Mark. Sometimes we overstep. Sometimes we mean well but miss the mark. And sometimes we have to learn that independence doesn't come with instructions. He nodded slowly, like he was absorbing every word. So, what happens now? Now, I said, leaning back in the sofa. I live my life on my terms. I have freedom, choices, and yes, the money from the sale to make new plans if I want. You get to reflect on what it means to respect someone else's independence, even when you love them. He chuckled ruefully, shaking his head. You really went all out, didn't you? I did, I said, grinning. And I'm not sorry. Life is too short to live under someone else's rules, no matter how well-intentioned they are. The afternoon was spent finalizing the last details with Diane, signing documents, and arranging for the new owners to move in. Every signature I put down, every page I handed over, felt like a declaration of self-reliance. Mark hovered nearby, occasionally asking questions about the process. But this time he wasn't trying to manipulate or control me. He was simply trying to understand, which, in a way, was more satisfying than anything else. By evening, everything was complete. The house was officially off my hands, and I felt a mixture of nostalgia, pride, and pure exhilaration. I wandered through each room one last time, taking in the hardwood floors that had been polished to perfection, the kitchen where countless meals had been prepared, the living room where friends and family had gathered for birthdays and holidays. Every corner held a memory, but I wasn't clinging. I was celebrating. Mark appeared in the doorway, holding a small envelope. Mum, I wanted to give you this, he said, handing it over. I opened it to find a card with a simple note. I'm sorry for trying to control you. I hope you know I love you, and I respect you. Mark. I felt a lump in my throat. Thank you, Mark, I said, smiling through my emotions. That means more than you know. He nodded, looking relieved, like a weight had finally lifted off his shoulders. I just want you to be happy, Mum. And I think maybe I understand now that you don't need me to do that for you. You've got it, I said, and I'm proud of you for realizing it. After he left, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, looking out at the empty yard, the mailbox, the familiar neighborhood. Everything was the same, yet everything had changed. The house had been my life for so long, but selling it was like reclaiming a part of myself I didn't realize had been missing. I wasn't just selling a property, I was reclaiming freedom, autonomy, and the confidence that comes from knowing you can make bold decisions, even when they surprise the people closest to you. That night, I took out my journal, something I hadn't touched in years. I wrote about the journey, the tension with Mark, the realization of that independence isn't a threat, the thrill of taking control of my life. There was something profoundly satisfying about putting it all into words, like solidifying the lessons I had learned into something tangible. Over the next few days, Diane called frequently with updates. The new owners were moving in quickly, and everything was going smoothly. I found myself laughing at the absurdity of it all, how a small basement suggestion had escalated into this grand adventure of autonomy. It was almost poetic. Mark called again, this time with a lighter tone. Mum, I saw the sign was taken down. The buyers are moving in, huh? Yes, they are, I said, smiling. And it's perfect. I know it's hard to see it from your perspective, but trust me, it's exactly what needed to happen. There was a pause. Then he chuckled. You really are something, Mum. I didn't think anyone could outsmart me like that. I laughed. Well, that's why I've been around longer, Mark. Experience counts for something. He laughed too, a genuine sound that didn't carry the tension it had before. Yeah, yeah, I see that now. I'm glad you're happy. And I am, I said, more than I've been in a long time. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I thought about the next chapter, perhaps a short trip, maybe a new hobby, definitely more time with friends. And the best part, every choice, every plan was entirely mine. No one else's rules, no one else's expectations, just mine. I realized something crucial in that moment. Independence isn't just about living alone. It's about making decisions that honor who you are, regardless of how others feel. It's about standing firm when the world, or even your own children, tries to dictate your path. And most importantly, it's about understanding that freedom, at any age, is priceless. I smiled, raising my glass in a quiet toast to myself. To freedom, to choices, to living life on my terms. And to Mark, my son, who finally understood that independence isn't a threat. It's a gift. The days after the sale were different, in the best possible way. I woke up one morning and realized I didn't have a long list of renovations or small fixes to think about, no basement plans hovering over my head, and most importantly, no one dictating how I should live my life. The house was sold, the money was in my account, and for the first time in years, I felt a level of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. Mark called me that afternoon. I could tell immediately from the tone of his voice that he was calmer, more grounded. "Mum," he said, "I've been thinking about everything, and I guess I finally get it. You needed to do this for you, not for me." I smiled. "Exactly, and I hope you've learned something about letting people make their own choices, even if it scares you a little." He chuckled softly. Yeah, yeah, I think I have. I just didn't want to see you alone, and I guess I forgot that alone doesn't mean incapable." "Being alone doesn't make me any less capable, Mark," I said gently. "I think you just needed a reminder that independence isn't a threat. It's a strength. And honestly, it's something you'll need one day too, when the roles are reversed." We talked for a while after that. Not about the house, not about the basement, but about life, about memories, about future plans, and about the strange little ways people try to control the ones they love. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were talking as equals. I wasn't the parent who had to coddle or explain myself, and he wasn't the adult trying to take over my life. We were simply having a conversation, and it was refreshing. I spent the next week settling into my life post-sale. I bought a few small things for my apartment, things I'd wanted for a while but never justified. A new armchair, a little bookshelf for all my novels, a small indoor plant that somehow made the space feel alive. I even started planning a short trip to the mountains, somewhere quiet and beautiful where I could walk, read, and just breathe. No obligation, no demands, just me. It was strange, in a liberating way, to feel completely unbound by expectations. I had lived so long thinking about what others wanted from me, adjusting, compromising, trying to be accommodating. And now, I wasn't accommodating anyone but myself. It was exhilarating. One afternoon, Diane called with an update from the buyers. "They moved in last week, Mum. They love it. They said the garden was exactly what drew them to the house, and your living room made them feel right at home." I laughed, imagining a new family filling my old spaces with laughter and life. It was comforting in a way, knowing the house would continue to be loved, even if it wasn't mine anymore. I'm glad, I told Diane. I really am. It's time for new memories there, and time for me to make my own elsewhere. Mark visited again, this time with a calm, almost sheepish demeanour. He walked through my apartment, observing the little changes I'd made, and for the first time, I felt that subtle shift. He wasn't trying to control me. He was seeing me as an independent adult, someone capable of managing her own life. "Mum," he said finally, sitting on the new armchair and tapping it appreciatively, "I have to admit, you were right. I overstepped. I didn't mean to, but I did. And well, I think I respect you even more now than I did before." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "Thank you, Mark. That means more than I can say. And I'm proud of you for seeing it. Respecting independence, even when it's hard, is one of the most important lessons anyone can learn." We sat together for a while, talking about our past, our quirks, and the funny little moments that had defined our relationship. There was laughter, of course, and some gentle teasing. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were simply mother and son. No battles, no hidden agendas, just genuine connection. That night, as I walked back to my apartment after dropping him off, I felt something shift inside me. Not dramatically, no, nothing cinematic, but subtly, profoundly. I realized that life doesn't slow down or lose meaning just because you're older. Independence doesn't vanish at 60, 65, or 70. It grows if you protect it, nurture it, and refuse to let anyone, even someone you love, dictate the terms of your life. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out the window, watching the neighborhood settle into quiet evening routines. There was a soft peace in that moment, a feeling of satisfaction and calm that comes from knowing you've stood up for yourself without compromising your integrity. Selling the house had been more than a financial transaction. It had been a declaration of self-respect and autonomy. Over the next few weeks, I took small steps toward the life I'd envisioned for myself. I signed up for a painting class, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in months, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes for long walks in the park. And slowly I started to feel a joy that wasn't tethered to expectations, obligations, or family drama. It was purely mine. Mark adjusted too. He visited occasionally, bringing stories about work, small updates about his life, and even little gifts he thought I'd like. But the dynamic had changed. He no longer tried to manage or micromanage my life. He respected the boundaries I had set. And more importantly, he seemed to understand the value of independence. One evening, as I sat in my new armchair with a book in hand, I thought back to the moment when he had first suggested the basement. I remembered the frustration, the anger, and the sting of feeling underestimated. But I also remembered the thrill of outsmarting him, not out of malice, but as a way of reclaiming my life. And I realized something beautiful. Every challenge, every confrontation had led me to this point, this sense of freedom and self-assurance that I wouldn't trade for anything. I raised my glass in a quiet toast to myself, to independence, to self-respect, to freedom at any age. Life isn't about being controlled or coddled. It's about making choices, standing firm, and knowing that your voice and your decisions matter. And as I took a sip of wine, I felt lighter than I had in years. I felt whole. Sometimes I still think about that house, the kitchen where I cooked countless meals, the living room where laughter echoed, the garden I tended with care, and I smile. Because even though it's no longer mine, it played a part in teaching me one of life's most important lessons, that autonomy is priceless, and that no one, Not even your own children can take it away if you refuse to let them. I've learned that freedom isn't a reward, it's a right, and I intend to enjoy every second of it, in my way, on my terms, for as long as I live. The house is gone, the money is in the bank, and my life, truly my life, is just beginning. And for the first time in decades, I feel unstoppable.